So my mind just kind of blocked and it's like, I gotta dump this property. I lost on that deal because I didn't ask the question, how could I make this work? I just said, I got to dump this property. They took that property that they would maybe break even and they're turning a 47K profit. Tonight, we're going to be talking about how to turn a problem rental property into a gold mine. And you might be asking, well, what exactly does that mean? What does it mean to be a gold mine? What is a problem property? Well, all this stuff I'm going to dive into. It's going to be building off the other Mondays that we've had in this series, right? So far, we've had the first one was how to do no money down deals. The second one was how to scale your rental portfolio without the banks. The third one, which was last week, how to help families in home ownership. And then tonight we're talking about how to turn a problem rental into a gold mine. I'm excited for tonight. I feel privileged to be able to share the information that I've learned over these many years of doing lease options, to be able to teach others how to do this powerful, powerful resource called lease option real estate investing. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to dive into this. I'm going to talk about, what do problem properties look like? Some of you might be going, I have a problem property. Some of you might be saying, not sure I know what you mean by a problem property. And then I will switch it over and talk about, how do you start to solve this problem? And then from there, I'm going to give you some very practical next steps. And as always, if you've got a pen or paper or a tablet or your computer, take notes. There's going to be stuff that is going to strike you as being very important, being aha moments, and as well, there'll be items that'll pop into your head that will relate directly to something that you've thought about before, and you're going to connect these two together, and you're going to go, that makes sense. And so you want to be able to write that down so that you can build on it afterwards, as opposed to if you don't write something down, then you're going to spend your time afterwards going, what was that I remember? How did that connect? What are problem properties? Some very common ones that I see that people get into a problem property with their own property is anything from they really want to be a hands-off landlord and they don't really come around checking on the property and it starts to deteriorate and all of a sudden they've got all these bills they need to do. Another scenario that I've seen is that someone who is excited about growing their portfolio. So let's take this property as an example. Someone will take this property and it's gone up in value, any number of reasons, because they did some forced appreciation or the market's just gone up and all of a sudden they've got 60 to 100K of equity in this property. So they pull that money out through a HELOC, a home equity line of credit or something like that. And they use the money for getting another property. Now, hopefully at least it's another property. Sometimes people will use HELOCs to go on vacation. I get the temptation, but really when you're borrowing money like this, you want it to be paying you back, not you paying it back. And another way that I've seen people get into these problems is that they hire a property manager who doesn't do a terrific job. And, a couple months of rent will go by or, they'll let bad tenants in there, as well as what I find often with new investors is that they'll sometimes put anybody in their property. And this like actually all these items create snowball effects because it all starts with one little thing. I won't check on the property this month or this year. Some people are like that this year. It just snowballs. And same with a bad tenant or, your property manager. You like your property manager. You think they're doing an okay job, but all of a sudden you find out 3 months later, they're doing a horrible job and they haven't filled your property and there's problems in your property that needs to be fixed that they didn't tell you about that aren't being fixed, which is repelling good tenants, and the snowball just keeps going on. Another scenario is, let's just say that you have a property and you've got several months in a row where you've had cash calls. It could be One could be a plugged toilet. The next month it could be, an element on the stove, and the next one could be a furnace fan. And sure, they're not all that expensive, but you have those back to back 3 months in a row, or even all at once in 1 month. That really starts to add up and it eats at your cash flow. And so when you've got regular tenants in your property that you're responsible for all those repairs, that comes back on you, and it just kind of goes on. Does that make sense? Kind of the snowball effect. How that keeps going is now someone will be short cash because their tenants just left and maybe they missed a month or two or three of rent, and you've got some repairs to do. So now it's like this person's got to start making decisions, right? Where am I going to get the money to pay for these repairs to get somebody in here? Well, maybe I will stop paying my monthly tax and I'll just leave it till the end. You can't really do that with your insurance, but you often can do it with your taxes. But then what happens is you kind of solve that headache. You kind of shuffle some money around. You get it fixed enough that you think you can get a good tenant in. You're having trouble filling it, still vacant. You're paying utilities. And then somebody walks in that looks okay. They've got cash for first month's rent and last month's rent, depending on how it works in your jurisdiction with rents and deposit. And you're like, okay, let's do it. And that right there is where it really starts to fall apart, because it's happened to me and I've seen it happen to many, many other people, where that person gets in there and you've got first month's rent, which is great. But then month two, the rent doesn't come in and they don't contact you. You contact them. After a couple tries, they finally get back to you, say, yeah, my grandmother or my car, whatever, I'll get it to you as soon as I can. That's a problem, right? That's another problem right there. As soon as I can. Well, that's as soon as I can could be 3 months. And people are just very trustworthy and like, okay, I know you've had trouble with your grandma and stuff like that, or she's had trouble. And it just starts to spread like that. And eventually what happens is, not always, but with those type of clients that offer cash up front, is that next month rent doesn't come in. And then you got to get them out. And it just becomes a nightmare. And if you were part of the previous weeks, I've talked about tired and frustrated landlord. That's exactly what this person's becoming. This person who bought this house, maybe they got 3 or 5 and they had a couple troubles in 1 or 2, and then this snowball started to happen. They are now starting to pull their hair out because they're tired of dealing with people who aren't trustworthy with the rents. They're tired of cleaning up after people when they move them out, all that sort of stuff, because they don't have systems in place and they don't have benchmarks in which they need to get the right people in there. And it can happen to anybody. It can happen to a brand new real estate investor, and it also happens to experienced real estate investors. So it's not really about being perfect in what you do. It's just being aware of what you're doing and how you're going about doing it. Often people think that real estate investing is passive. And even when you hire a property manager, you've got to manage that manager. So imagine in your own house, let's take something real basic, that you hire a cleaner off of the internet and you don't really know them from anybody, but you come in and they say they're going to do X, Y, Z, and then you're going to pay them, $100. So do you just leave it at that? No, you've got to give them direction on what you want done. Oftentimes these people will say, here's what I'm going to do. And they give you a list of items. That's great. Now you can manage them really easily because they've given you a list of items to be accountable to. But sometimes people come in and they're kind of like, they're new and they'll go, what would you like me to do? Oh, okay. Well, I thought you would just know what to do. Well, you've paid me for 2 hours, and there's likely 6 hours of work in anybody's house that hasn't been thoroughly cleaned in a while. So what would you like me to do with my 2 hours? So you got to manage that person and you got to give them real specific directives. You also have to follow up once the job's done and saying, okay, you were going to do these 6 things and you only did 4 of them. You did those 2 other things, but I didn't want those done. It's the same with being a hands-free landlord. Someone's got to be giving the directives. And if it's not you, then that person still has to be managed in having those directives. So there's those type of people. There's also people who are who doing flips, right? The idea that they want to purchase a house, they want to flip it, they want to sell it for profit. So both week 1 and week 2, we talked about both Kyle and Dave had flips that just didn't go as plan A. If you flipped several houses, you know that they don't always go as planned. Maybe you've had 2 or 3, you've knocked everyone out of the park. That's awesome. Often what happens is there's usually one pretty quickly that you go over budget, you go over time, and all of a sudden you realize you're losing money. Now you got to sell it, which means that you got to take even more of a loss. This strategy that we're going to talk about, how to turn into cash flowing property like a gold mine, is also applies to doing with flips because as Kyle and Dave talked about, they were basically, if they could sell it at the price they wanted to on MLS with a realtor paying the realtor fees, closing costs, all that sort of stuff, they were going to break even. Well, how many flips do you want to do that you just break even? You don't want to do any of them. So that's when those guys got involved with me and I taught them how to do lease options. And so they turned that property around and they're making $47,000 on that property now because of this. So in terms of how you're solving this, you can imagine what my answer is going to be. It's going to be lease options. When I think about Dave and Kyle and their flip, and when I think about average investor Sue, who has got a couple properties, but 2 of them are doing good. In fact, they're doing great, but one of them, she's underwater each month. When you take the lease option strategy and implement the rent to own strategy, right? So for those of you who are new to this, lease options and rent to own are the same thing. Lease options are the legal term. Rent to own is kind of the street friendly term that when you say rent to own, most people kind of know what it is. Unfortunately, there's a lot of bad connotations that go with the term rent to own because lots of people do it incorrectly. But the way that we do them here, we do them great, and we are helping families get into home ownership. When you turn one of these properties into this strategy, into a lease option and into a rent to own, you can go from negative cash flow to not only positive cash flow for the next 3 years, but you're going to make a much larger profit at the end of the deal. This video is called how to salvage a sideways real estate deal. And basically it's exactly what we're talking about tonight. And so this is only a 17-minute video. I'll give you the link at the end. But I walk through all the numbers. I first paint the scenario. It's very similar to what I just told you. And so it takes a scenario of someone who is underwater each month in that they've got a first mortgage, but then they've got a second mortgage now, with a line of credit, HELOC or something like that. And they're behind on their taxes and they don't have any wiggle room for any repairs. So they were negative each month and obviously losing sleep. And then we implemented this strategy to it, and it turned to be a positive cash flow property. And so how that happened was because when you put a rent-owned client into a property, like if you've got a single family house that you've got and you turn it into a lease option and you put a rent-owned client into it, what happens is the rent-owned client's going to put money down up front, much larger than, a deposit, like a half month's deposit or whatever it is for you. It's anywhere from 5 to 10 to 20 to 50. They're going to put down. That goes to you and you hold that, but that becomes essentially your reserve if they choose to go a different route or they choose to stop paying rent. Now, on these deals, the tenant buyer is responsible for. So tenant buyer is the rent-to-own client. The tenant buyer is responsible for repairs. Now, what kind of repairs? That's up to you to decide. I typically do between $500 and $1,000 per repair. So if today, if the toilet gets plugged, that's their responsibility, and they are responsible to fix that. If tomorrow the furnace fan goes, that is also their responsibility. Now, it's not very often that things happen back to back like that. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to help them to think like a homeowner. Don't allow toys and other stuff to go into your toilet or whatever else, to clog it. Pay attention to that sort of stuff. Maintain your furnace. And there's other things. So we give them a new homeowners manual when they move into our properties. That teaches them how to do this, as well as it gives them our preferred vendors, to do this work, because there's just a lot of vendors out there that charge various prices. And so, for example, one of our tenant buyers, I got a text from her, and she said, "So we got the furnace company coming, and they say it's going to be about $1,100." And I was like, "Oh, what happened?" So first of all, the fact that she took the initiative to call the furnace company was awesome. 2 thumbs up. And she knew on this particular relationship I've got with her, or with my company, she's responsible, like her and her family are responsible for the first $500 of every repair. Now she was notifying me of the cost and that she would pay the first 500. We, along with the investor, would pay the rest of that bill. So then I just asked her, I said, "So who did you call?" And she gave me a name, and I don't think I had heard of them. And I said, "Well, why don't you call the company that's in our book that we gave you?" And she didn't know where the book was, so we gave her the number. And long story short, they came out, they fixed it for $550. And because that was our preferred vendor, and we use them all the time on when we're doing flips, when we're on these houses that we're fixing up, all that sort of stuff. And what was great about it was she was only responsible for the first $500, but she just said, "You know what? We just paid the full $550. We got it." And so it was dealt with. You don't have the maintenance fees that you normally do with a troubled property. You've got 2 mortgages now you're paying for. You've got the weight of behind on taxes, and then you got all this other stuff. Now you've got some money from the tenant buyer up front. Also, the tenant buyer is responsible for repairs. And if you want to set it at $1,000, you can do that. I've also done it where any repair that needs to be done is the tenant's responsibility. So with that, you can greatly cut your costs. Now, this tenant buyer wants to purchase this property in the rent-to-own program. So when you go to sell it to them in 2 to 3 years, you've got no vacancy costs because they're living in there and they're not going to move. They're just going to qualify for the mortgage, and you've got no realtor fees. I won't go into a lot of detail, much more than what I just did. This video here, which I'll give you a link to, goes into all that detail. And basically, it shows you how you can take a underperforming property that's negative cash flow each month, and you put great tenants into it, and they're going to give you more money up front. They're probably going to pay you more each month for your rent. And then they're responsible for repairs, and then they're going to buy it at the end. So going from a negative cash flowing property that likely if you put on the market as is, it probably would take a loss, if you sold it to through a realtor or that sort of thing. And that's not a good spot to be in, because it's kind of like quitting. When you've got something that you're working towards and you end up settling for second or third best, it's kind of like quitting, because like I understand it's a mental game. I've been there on properties many times before where I just hit a wall, and it's just like, I don't know what to do here. And I think I talked about this in week 1. I talked about one of my early on duplexes. I had a property manager looking after it. He did a very poor job. And finally, when I got in there to see the property, my heart sank, right? This was probably my first time in a property that was beat up pretty bad. Actually, it wasn't even that bad compared to what I've seen, but very dirty, a whole bunch of stuff left behind. And it's like, it's not something I'd want to live in. So I wasn't proud of that. And so my mind just kind of blocked, and it's like, I gotta dump this property. Right. And I lost on that deal because I didn't ask the question, how could I make this work? I just said, I got to dump this property. So I ended up selling it to a guy who wanted to do a flip in it. And he asked me, or I offered him, I can't remember, but I ended up selling it for 125 and gave him a $25,000 vendor take back mortgage, right? So it's a second mortgage on the property that he's going to pay me back with interest. And so I watched it closely because I was still invested in it because I had 25K still in the deal. So we were friends, acquaintances, friends, and I would come back periodically. He's like, well, he's doing some good work in here. 3, 4, 5 months later, he got it reappraised for, I think it was 180. And with that reappraisal, new appraisal, he got it refinanced with a updated mortgage and was able to pay me my 25K back with interest. And now, what do you think I'm doing now? I'm going, I could have done that. I could have done that. I just wasn't thinking. And so often when people hit a wall or a roadblock, their brain shuts down and they give up on that. And, because you'll meet people who have invested in real estate in past. They had a bad experience, and then they just got rid of the properties. Well, that forever will be their taste of rental properties, will be that negative experience. But if they had have turned it around and done a strategy like this, where negative cash flow and a positive cash flow and a big chunk of money at the end, it's like, well, this is brilliant. Why don't we keep on going? And that is just a really powerful way to turn a bad situation, an underperforming property, negative cash flow into a gold mine. So my mind just kind of blocked, and it's like, I gotta dump this property. Right. And I lost on that deal because I didn't ask the question, how could I make this work? I just said, I got to dump this property. Dave talked about that, in that they took that property that they would maybe break even, and they're turning a 47K profit. All right. So if you go to my YouTube channel, this is what the thumbnail looks like. It says how to salvage a sideways real estate deal. I go into a fair bit of depth using one of the spreadsheets that I use. And I walk you through step by step how we took a deal that had gone sideways, meaning not as planned, and how we made it work, how we salvage the deal. Because this happens all the time. And most people will end up just kind of going, I don't know what to do. And they'll somehow walk away with it. And sometimes that walking away is, just getting a realtor to sell it as is. And, they take a bath. I've seen people take baths of, 20, 60, even 100 grand just to get rid of the deal. And mind space is a big piece in this too, because whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Think about that one. That's from Henry Ford, and that has pushed my limits many, many times over the years. Next steps. Don't be like AP. First name that came to my mind is don't be like Aaron Peters. I have no idea who Aaron Peters is. It's just a name that came off the top of my head. But really what it stands for is don't be an analysis paralysis. Don't analyze so much that you become paralyzed in moving forward. Happens all the time. Everybody struggles with this at some point or another, where you keep hesitating to pull the trigger because, oh, well, what about this? Or what about that? And you're always trying to solve everything when half, if not three quarters of those things that you're saying, what about this, never even happen. And something else happens that you never even thought of. So you need to take steps going forward. And so don't be like Aaron Peters. Don't analyze it to death, until you get paralyzed with it. Just don't do that. Take little steps as you go. A second thing here, as you're moving forward in this, and I can imagine that for those of you who are live on with me here, as well as those who are watching the video, is that somewhere through this, you've got a property in your mind's eye that you can apply this to, or you've got a potential tenant buyer in your mind's eye, or you've got an investor or a tired and frustrated landlord and their house in your mind's eye that you can apply some of this stuff to. Tell me if I'm wrong, but if I've done my job describing to you this stuff, it should pop in your mind some ideas that are your natural next steps. Because often people say, well, what should I do next? Well, you tell me. What popped into your head over the last 20 minutes of watching this video? That's what you need to do. And you're going to say, well, I don't have that guy's phone number. I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to say. Don't worry about it. Just take action on that little bit. Others have gone before you and have been in the exact same spot. You're looking at one right here. You're looking at someone who has had all the fears that you guys are experiencing. Yeah, some days were harder than others. Some months were harder than others. But you got to keep pushing to get to your goal, right? So when you know what your goal is, and for some of you, it might be just getting your first property together. For some of you, it's you want to get your next property, or you've got a property in your mind that you want to apply this to, and you're going, I don't have all the pieces. Well, just take steps. Anything you wrote down that was an aha moment, take steps, knowing that others have gone before you, and then that's where you can get involved in a community. This Rent-Own Facebook community. It's called Rent-Own Real Estate Investing, and there's the URL of it. Basically, facebook.com/groups/rent-to-own real estate investing. Just go there, hit apply. You got to answer 2 questions and your email address, and you're in the group. Now you've got people that you can talk with if you're not already in a coaching or a mastermind group. All right. The other one is my YouTube channel. I just looked at it today. I've got over 60 videos in there that can help you. So this is the one I talked about earlier. If you go into, that's my YouTube URL, Creative Investor U. You can search for this video. You can just look for it. And again, it goes into a lot of detail. The last thing is to take action. And that's why I told you at the top to write stuff down. And I've been chatting with, several of you have been on almost every call. Thank you, by the way. I really appreciate that. And you've been making comments to me after the videos and saying, hey, I'm taking action. I'm doing that one thing, and it's helping me gain confidence, and it's helping me gain momentum, and I'm learning new things so that I can go to the next level. Taking that action is so key, and I've said it, I think, every week. I'm going to say it again tonight. If you learned one thing tonight, after this video is over, take action on it. If it's research, or if it's calling up some people or messaging somebody, you got to do that. You got to take action. So are there any questions from anyone? Great question, Hannah. No, you can. Okay, so the question is, do I have to put is it all right to put a rent-own sign in my front yard? Absolutely. I do street signs, and no, you don't have to check with the city. I can't think of any place, if it's your property or if it's somebody else's property that you got permission to put it on, you don't need a permit. If you put that sign on a boulevard in the middle of the road or something like that, yeah, that's a different issue. You need permits for that. But you don't need permits for what we're doing here, and you can put that sign up. So a sign on your yard is great. And I've even done open houses with Rent-Own. Oh, I'm so glad you said this. I'm so glad you said this, Hannah. I was told by a realtor that I was not allowed to do so. So, what I'm teaching here tonight is nothing you learned in high school. The basic math that you need to do to run a deal like this, you will have learned in grade 9, maybe some in grade 10. That's all you need. What's what's going to happen here is as you take action, you're going to have people saying you can't do that. Oftentimes what people do is that they don't understand what you're doing. And so they're kind of like, well, no, that can't be done. It's like, someone who always got traditional mortgages, and you talk to this person about private financing, and it's like, what are you talking about? I talked to a banker here locally. It was with one of our credit unions, and he'd worked with the credit union for years. And he ended up working for, like, I think he retired and then worked for another company doing some financial analysis stuff for them. And then we got talking about a deal because he became interested in doing some creative real estate investing deals. So we got talking about a deal, and I said, "Would you be interested in?" No, I didn't say, "Would you?" I told him I'm looking for some private lenders on this. He goes, "Well, what do you mean private lenders? Wouldn't you just go to the bank?" Well, no, not so much on this one. And there's a dozen reasons why I wouldn't go to the bank on this one. And he goes, "Oh, I didn't know you could do that." This was a banker working in a bank for many, many years. Did not know that. Like, if I was new to this and I talked to this guy, I would be like, "Oh, is what I'm doing not right? Is it illegal?" Let's presume that this realtor Hannah had the best intentions. They're wrong. Flat out, they're wrong. There's no reason why you can't put that on there. And I can remember when I first wanted to start getting into real estate, I had someone in my life who said, "You can't do that. You can't charge more than what your mortgage is." Right? I was setting up lease, lease amount, rent amount. And it was going to be $1,500, and my mortgage payment was with taxes, I think, 1,200. And this person had never done a rental before, and he was sitting in his couch, and he said to me, "You can't do that. You can't charge more than your mortgage." And I was like, "Oh, shoot. Huh. Guess I won't do that." And so be very mindful of who you're listening to. Most people have great intentions. Sometimes people are idiots and they're just trying to be a goof. But most people have good intentions, but they're giving you wrong information. So oftentimes people who give you wrong information have never done it before. When they give you advice about doing something that you've never done before, ask them, "So how did it go for you when you tried this?" "Oh, well, I never did it." "Well, then how do you know it doesn't work?" You got to push back. You got to think for yourself and not just accept what people say can and cannot be done. Because when you're doing creative deals that, are using private money, or, all the contracts that I use in my lease options, people don't understand those. And they're going to be confused. But with you educating yourself, taking action, you're going to grow and you're going to know, and then you're going to become the authority of it in the relationships to people around you. And all of a sudden, Hannah, this realtor is going to come back to you and go, "So I've been watching you for a while." And it's like, "You're doing good stuff. How can I do this?" Literally, that will happen to you if you keep taking action. Would you leave your personal phone number on the sign? So when I first started out, I did. I don't anymore. I try to separate, my home life and my private stuff from out there, just because I'm doing so many deals and want to have a degree of separation. So I've got either a separate cell phone or what's called a VoIP number. So it's an internet telephone number that you can have ring to your cell phone. There's so many ways to do that. There's Google Voice, Ring Central, Zoom has their own phone line system. There's many of them. I'm starting a new mastermind. It's a beta mastermind. I'm only accepting 10 people into this group where we come together on a weekly basis, 10 of us, cameras on, and it's not just one or two people talking all the time. It's everyone talking. You know, they've got questions, they took action, and here's their experience from taking action, and they share that. And someone goes, I had that same experience. Well, here's what I did, all that sort of stuff. If this is something that you're interested in, you can just go to my website, creditinvestor.ca. Just join in on the wait list. I'm excited about this because it's going to be a small group of action takers who want to grow in this field of real estate investing, specifically using lease options and other creative financing. Hey, so I hope tonight was really helpful for you. I hope you could catch the picture of how you can take an underperforming asset, like a rental property, and do a couple things to it and turn it into a cash flowing gold mine that makes you profit, alleviates your headaches, and helps you be successful in real estate investing. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you next week.